All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. Apologies for the issues, but we are here. Brian Jester, co-founder of Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com, here for some MMA DFS picks, lineup advice, FanDuel, DraftKings. It is UFC 282, the final pay-per-view event of the year, and Magomed Ankalaev, Jan Blachowicz. Pretty interesting card. 12 fights. Patty the Baddy's on the card as well. And we're doing this live Q&A, about 30 minutes or so. Answer your questions. What we normally do here is we break down the main event. We talk about debuting fighters, which we surprisingly have a lot of on this pay-per-view card. Very rare to see this many debuting fighters on a pay-per-view card, but we have them. Fighters that have less than 4 fights under their belt, we give some context to their stats. A fight that you have to target in DFS. Some of our favorite prize picks and bets. Everything you need to crush tonight's slate. And apologies for the delay. I will say that we're 5 minutes late here. Hopefully, you guys stuck around. We'll blame it all on Jake and his computer. But Jake, what's up, man? How's it going?
Yeah, what's up, man? 1 minute before we go live, my computer crashed. So sorry about that, guys. But we're back. We're good to go, and looks like a fun slate, man. I'm ready to talk about it.
Absolutely. So you and I were just talking. Only 2 slates left in the year. This year has flown by, and we appreciate everyone tuning in as always. So let's just get this started since we wasted enough time trying to get prepared. And let's start with the main event. 12 fights, one main event. Jake, it's been a while actually. It feels like since we've had a 1 5 round fight on a pay-per-view card. So in the end, this is ultimately just like any other 12 fight card that we've had. So let's start with the main event and Ankalaev and Jan Blachowicz. Break it down. How do you expect it to play out? And most importantly, what does it mean for DFS?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be like a slower paced main event. I mean, both guys are not super high volume. They generally rely on early finishes to score well. Don't really expect to see a ton of grappling, but Ankalaev does have the Greco-Roman background, and grapples some. He has a couple submissions. So, I mean, it's possible Ankalaev could look to wrestle some. I mean, it's hard to say. We have seen Jan get controlled for like basically a whole round in his last couple of fights. So it would be smart for Ankalaev to wrestle, but we've said that before, and he oftentimes doesn't. So we could just see a slower paced striking battle. It's really hard to say, but I think both guys are somewhat reliant on landing an early finish to score well in DFS, and I don't think we're going to see a volume driven, high scoring decision which really makes it tougher to feel confident about either one of them scoring well because it's rare to see Jan's fights end in the first round. Ankalaev only has one loss in his career, and it was that last second submission defeat to Paul Craig, literally in the final second of round three. So, I mean, obviously he's pretty durable. So I think it probably goes, into the second or third round. Maybe we see a finish there, and I think that's unlikely to really put up a big score. I kind of think we see like an Ankalaev second or third round knockout, but wouldn't be that surprising to see it go the distance based on what we've seen recently out of these guys. I will say this got moved from 3 rounds to 5 on like 2.5 weeks' notice. So, I mean, who knows what their cardio looks like? That might just be one more reason why they come in a little more conservatively, a little bit slower pace. I mean, this is for a title now, but I don't think either guy is just going to go completely crazy. I think they're both going to fight kind of smart. So I think it makes it trickier in DFS. I think in low risk contests, I think that makes it where you can't really stack it, which makes low risk a little bit trickier this week. And then in high risk contests, I'm kind of treating it more like a 3 round fight where, if they get a finish in the first round or like a late second round finish with, decent stats, they can score well, but otherwise they're probably going to be left out. And with Jan, there's more ways he can get there based on his price tag. So, he could score 90, 95 points and maybe still end up in the winning lineup, whereas Ankalaev really needs to, score better than that to make it work. So I think it's hard to get too excited about Ankalaev here, and but I still think Ankalaev wins, which makes it harder on Blachowicz. So that's kind of my take on the main event.
Yeah, certainly expect it to be lower volume, which does make it tricky. And yeah, Blachowicz at 7K is an interesting price tag because, with only 12 fights, if he wins, there's a decent chance he ends up in the optimal lineup. But I agree with you that the money line's pretty accurate. And generally, we see these bigger favorites in the main event have positive expected value. So, yeah, it's a tricky slate. And the low risk aspect is difficult because we can't really guarantee a 100-point score. We do get the price savings with Blachowicz, which is nice. But again, And I will say, Jake, every time we say that, don't stack the main event, it ends up scoring like 180 points in the most crazy back and forth battle of all time. So now that we've said that, you guys can expect that in this one.
That's true.
So, all right, moving on. Let's talk about the debuting fighters, which is where we generally get our edge in MMA DFS. And we do have 4 on tonight's card. We did have 5. Unfortunately, one of the most exciting fights on the card did get canceled due to the weight miss from De Silva. But Jake, let's start from the earliest fight to the latest fight, which fight order now matters with late swap on DraftKings. So we'll start with this matchup of debuting fighters: Cameron Simon, Steven Kozlow, 2 guys who have never fought in the UFC before. And Ronnie Lawrence pulled out recently. Kozlow stepped in on short notice. And Jake, he was asked to step in multiple times throughout the past year. This is the first time he actually is stepping into the UFC. But talk to me about these 2 guys, what we can expect from this matchup, pros, cons, strengths, weaknesses, DFS scoring.
Yeah, so Simon is, however you say it, with the South African pronunciation, I definitely don't have, but he's 21 years old, super young guy. He's the Duplessis protege. So he's been training with Duplessis since he was like 13 or 14, started pretty young. He's coming off a 3rd round KO win on the Contender Series, still just has 6 fights, got 5 finishes, 6-0. So, I mean, decent start to his career, but still super young. Growing into his frame still, still kind of a guy you can tell that he's going to get bigger as he progresses, but he's still, he still almost looks like a teenager right now. But he looks decent, decent striker. He'll go for guillotines. That's kind of the go-to move at his gym, is to lock up that guillotine. You'll see Duplessis do the same thing. And I think it's a really favorable matchup here. Kozlow, 25 years old, also 6-0. All 6 of his wins have come by round 1 submission, which I think you could look at that like, oh, he's dangerous, or you could look at it as he probably has no cardio and he hasn't fighting anyone. He's literally never faced an opponent with a winning record. He hasn't shown anything in terms of striking. It's hard to even find a bunch of tape on this guy. I mean, there's some stuff out there, but definitely can't find all of his fights. So he's somewhat of a mystery. And I would expect a guy like this to have bad cardio, especially taking the fight on like a week and a half notice. But you never know. I mean, it's just speculation. Maybe he's better than we think, but for me, when I look at his record and I look at who he's been fighting, I've got some alerts going off in my head that this guy's probably fraudulent. But I mean, we'll see. He'll have a chance to prove me wrong today, against a young opponent. So we'll see what happens there.
And that's the thing here with most of these debuting fighters, at least 3 of the 4, there's not a ton of tape, and the opposition is questionable. So any line movement, any of our models' values, you do have to take with a grain of salt, because like you said, the tape is hard to find, which most of the time we can find the tape. Like this Kozlow guy, his tape was scrubbed from the internet. You can barely find any of his matches. So the one thing I told you earlier in the week, Jake, I did bet Kozlow first round sub, not only just because of his record, but because I saw Simon get taken down and controlled for 10 minutes in one of his recent fights. And that's probably how Simon fails, if he gets taken down and Kozlow is better than we expect and subs him. So I think you have to have some Kozlow exposure in the largest contest, but I agree that just in general, this is probably a pretty good matchup. We know short notice debuting fighters haven't performed that well in general, and Simon has slate breaking upside, I would say, if it's not one of those guillotines that he locks up.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think Kozlow's the type of guy that, he'll sell out early for a submission. If he doesn't get it, there's a good chance he gasses. And I mean, those are the times where we can really put up massive scores. The guy just gasses, he's on the ground, and you land 100 ground strikes before you finish him.
For sure. All right, moving on. In the next fight, the 11th fight on the card, or fight number 11, we have Eric Silva making his debut against TJ Brown. What have you seen on tape from Eric Silva?
Man, I was really impressed by this guy. I mean, sort of similar to Kozlow, so many of his finishes have come in round 1 that you have to worry about his cardio. But this guy's a lot more experienced, 35 years old, really impressive, And this guy we do have a bunch of tape on. So we've seen him finishing people, consistently. He's got like 6 straight finishes. I know Sherdog incorrectly lists all of those as first round wins. One of those actually came in the second round. But still, 5 first round finishes, 1 second round finish. The guy hasn't been in a fight that lasted longer than 7 minutes since like 2018, I believe. So really dangerous early on. The only thing we don't really know about him is his cardio. And generally, when you have guys that are that explosive, they oftentimes struggle with their cardio as fights go on. So that would be the one red flag. But The guy looks so dangerous. He's cheap on DraftKings, well, cheap on both sites. I'm pretty excited about him. I mean, obviously, with any debuter, you have to kind of, take it with a little bit of grain of salt because you don't know how they're going to react to being in their debut, let alone on a pay-per-view card. I mean, tons of pressure, but this guy's older. I mean, I'm getting, kind of Victor Henry vibes from him, not just the way he looks, but coming in at the older age, I think he'll handle it better. All the other guys making their debut are really young, 25, 18, 21. This guy's been around. He's 35. I think he'll be able to handle the pressure. I mean, you never know, maybe not, but I'm pretty impressed by him. And despite his karate background, this guy actually looks to get fights to the ground really quickly, looks to land ground and pound and lock up submissions as soon as he sees the opportunity. So really dangerous finisher. And he's going against TJ Brown, who's been finished 6 times in his career, had been training at Glory MMA, so you don't know really what his training status is. I mean, I think he was like 50-50 at Glory and somewhere else, but still, that's still a shakeup in your training regimen for him. So I think that that's also a boost for Silver right there.
For sure. And speaking of trying to get fights to the ground quickly, that leads us to our final debuting fighter, Raul Rosas, just 18 years old, making his debut. Jake, all the fights that we've seen, it's all pretty much the same. Get the fight to the ground and get work done there. So what are your thoughts on him being so young, first and foremost, and then what we can expect from him in DFS?
Yeah, I mean, pretty crazy. This guy was 17 when he went on Contender Series. Like, he had to get a permission slip signed from his parents just to go on there. He's still a senior in high school, although I guess technically after he got signed, he dropped out of high school. But he was a senior in high school, and that's the year he would be in. But pretty crazy. He's a one-dimensional wrestler. I would say for being 18 years old, he looks like he's filled out decently. He's not small, he's not scrawny. I mean, he's a lot bigger than Jay Perrin. So I think he's an interesting talent. Obviously, he's still really green, doesn't offer much in terms of striking, but he's a relentless wrestler, and that's what you want on DraftKings. I think he's going to be looking to just take the fight to the ground early and often. Anytime Perrin gets up, he's going to be looking to take him back down. So he's got a chance to put up a huge takedown total. I mean, he has, I believe, 5 of his 6 wins have come early, but he hasn't really fought much in competition, and arguably his last opponent was his toughest, and that was also his one decision. So I'm not sold on him being a super dangerous finisher yet, but I think grinding out decisions on the mat is definitely squarely in play here. And, despite the young age, I think that he's still going to look strong out there. I don't think that, there's been a lot of talk about Jay Perrin and man strength, whatever. I think that Roses actually looks like the stronger fighter, personally.
Yeah, and speaking of scoring, right, if this goes to a decision, it's more than likely that he puts up a pretty great score on DraftKings, but a middling score on FanDuel because of the lack of control time and ground strikes, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you look at his Contender Series fight, it would have been good for over 100 points on DraftKings, and it was like 55 points on FanDuel. So, I mean, I would call him a DraftKings only play, except for the fact that he could land like 10 takedowns and or lock up a submission. So that's what he needs on FanDuel. Whereas on DraftKings, if he lands 5 takedowns and 12 minutes of control time, he can still score well. So a better DraftKings play, but I wouldn't completely eliminate him from your player pool on FanDuel, but I would take it way down.
Fair enough. And we have a question from Tony in the chat as we transition to our next segment. Tony says this card is hard to break down. What's the best live dog of this fight for value? Jake, who would you consider? We don't have any mispriced dogs as far as the money line has exceeded where their salary slot is on DraftKings. But as far as underdogs go, Jake, who do you think is the livest, safest, best value for? We'll call this low risk contest, cash games, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not even close. It's Chris Curtis. I think he should be the favorite in that fight. He's the only dog I really trust on the slate. He's the only one that I'm straight up picking him to win, whereas I think probably all the other favorites are rightfully favorites. I think Chris Curtis can definitely win this fight. I think he's better than Joaquin Buckley. So that's by far my favorite dog.
Good answer. All right, moving on. Let's play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Again, if you guys do have questions, throw them in the chat. We'll answer them here throughout the show. We'll be here till 2:05 or so Eastern. And in this segment, what we do is we look at fighters who have less than 4 fights under their belt in the UFC, give some context to their stats. Are they good or not? And is this matchup good or not for them in DFS? So Jake, we'll sort by fight number, earliest to latest. And moving on down, TJ Brown has 5 fights, so let's not include him. Hernandez, he has 5 fights, let's not include him. Let's keep on moving. Curtis does have 4 fights, and we just talked about it, so I guess I can summarize. Good fighter. Do you think this is a good matchup, though, for DFS?
I think it is just because Buckley's been knocked out 3 times before. So I mean, obviously he's prone to getting knocked out, and that's what Curtis needs to score well is to get a knockout. It's a little bit of a tougher matchup to put up a big striking total. So it's going to leave him even more dependent on getting a knockout a little bit earlier. Like I could see a third round knockout maybe not being a great score just because Buckley's not a guy you can just, land 100 strikes on because A is super dangerous. He's got long arms, so he's got long reach, so you can't just sit there. And just historically, we've only seen people, I think he's averaging 3.42 significant strikes absorbed per minute. So not a guy that historically has been hit a ton, but I think it's going to be a brawl, man. These guys actually met up not that long ago, and Chris Curtis was talking about an interview. He was basically like, "Hey, man, like Buckley's like, hey, you're not going to shoot on me, right?" And Curtis is like, "Well, you're not going to run away from me, right?" He's like, "We're going to have a fight of the night, fight of the year type fight." So I mean, that's the way they're setting it up. Maybe it's just marketing, but it seems like they both want to go at it. So I think it's a good matchup for Curtis to score well.
And that would seem to play into Curtis's mindset after that last fight against Hermanson, where he was frustrated with how little action there was. So I can see that happening for sure. So, all right, moving on down really quickly. I know he doesn't fit the criteria here, but Edmund Shabazian, he has more than 5 fights in the UFC, but we haven't seen him in a while, Jake. And he started off hot and then was immediately put back in his place with 3 straight losses to tough competition. But given what we know, do you think he's a good fighter? And is this a good matchup against Lugambula?
Yeah, so I mean, he just finally switched camps, which I think is probably it has to be a good thing for him, but it definitely adds to the uncertainty because he's been gone he hasn't fought in over a year, and he's at a completely new team. So I mean, his issue is he's been terrible on the ground, and he gasses out super hard after the first round. So he's had over a year to work in that. He's still a young guy, new camp. I'm sure that they've been at least trying to address those issues because they're so glaring that I would have to think he's improved at least to some extent. And interestingly, Dolce is actually similar, also a guy that gasses super hard and lately has had durability issues since dropping down to 185. So I think that we still got to give Edmund a shot. I know he's been struggling lately, but I don't think we can call him a bad fighter. I just think he's still a young fighter. He had so much success early on in his career that he wasn't really growing anymore. He just thought he was going to knock everyone out in the first round. And then as soon as people started putting him on his back, I mean, we just saw that hole that he had nothing there. So I assume he's worked on it. We'll see. He's kind of a wild card, but he's facing a fellow gasser. So, both guys are maybe a little bit less likely to just dominate the other late in round 2 once the other gasses out because they might both be gassed.
Is he going to be overlooked in DFS with Ankalaev right there with him and Patty $400 cheaper?
Definitely. I mean, historically, Edmund's been popular, but I think this is the time where the field finally gets off of him. And I think this is the time where he could finally actually have a good performance. So I think it's a good time to get on him. I think the field's going to be going the wrong direction on him.
WW in the chat says, I feel like Dalka is live for a big score with takedowns. He pops in the model a little bit, Jake, too, with his score. I was kind of surprised to see that. Do you think he implements a wrestling heavy game plan? And if so, can he utilize that for 15 minutes to take advantage?
So the problem with Dalka is he has no cardio. So it's like it's his catch-22. Like, yeah, he's got a judo background, and theoretically he should be able to land takedowns. But we saw in his last fight, as soon as he tries to start landing takedowns, he just gasses out. So, I mean, I don't think that maybe he lands 1 takedown, maybe he lands 2 takedowns. But if he does that, he's going to gas even faster. So, no, he can't do that for 15 minutes. So, yeah, I mean, if he had better cardio, then I would say yes, but he doesn't. So no, I don't think he's going to be able to put on a dominant grappling performance because if he does, he's going to be gassed by the second round.
Fair enough. Jay Perrin up against Rosas, 0-2 in the UFC, lost his Contender Series fight. Is he good or bad? And is this a good or bad matchup for him?
Yeah, nah, he's bad, and this is a bad matchup.
Yeah, fair enough. We got a question in the chat. Says, any fighter going to catch a runaway ownership today in small field contests? I would guess, Jake, that Patty qualifies there. I'm not sure who else. Do you think anyone is going to see significantly massive ownership in small field compared to the big GPP?
Maybe Curtis. I think I know the odds have been moving against him a little, but I don't think I'm the only person on Curtis here. I think the dogs are pretty gross. So in small field where maybe you don't need all the dogs to score over 100, like maybe a round 3 knockout from Curtis that scores 90 points is enough. I could see him being more popular in small field, especially with sharper contests. But yeah, I'm with you on Patty. I think that Patty is going to be really popular.
Let's talk about Patty really quickly. I know we're skipping over Duplessis here, but Pimlet, 3 fights in the UFC. Is he good or bad? Is this a good or bad matchup?
Yeah, so I mean, Patty's kind of, he's a crazy fighter. He's great for DFS. Obviously, he has holes in his game. We haven't seen his cardio tested, but that's one concern. His striking defense isn't great, but that's what makes him a fun fighter and good for DFS. Is he's just down to get in these crazy brawls. He can grapple. He's got dangerous striking, even if he keeps his chin high and gets caught sometimes. And I think it's a great matchup for him because Gordon isn't a power puncher. He's not going to take advantage of Patty having his chin high. Even if Gordon catches him, I think Patty's going to eat it and then be the one landing the heavier shots back. The one thing Gordon could do here is potentially wear on Patty's cardio, which that's something that Gordon is good at. So if Patty can't get a finish in the first 2 rounds, we could see him gas. I mean, we don't know. We haven't seen him make it that long in the UFC yet, but in the past, we've seen him slow down in 5-round fights, just from a cardio perspective. I mean, who knows where he's at right now? The fact that he cuts so much weight in between, he gets so heavy in between fights and then ends up cutting so much weight probably isn't great for his cardio. So maybe Gordon can take over late in the fight, but Gordon's been finished in all 5 of his losses. I still think this is a good spot for Patty to knock him out early. But it's one of those ones where we could see Patty have a hot start, and if he can't get the finish, we could see it flip pretty heavily late in the second round if he gasses out.
Fair enough. WW says Patty is a full fade in his opinion. He won't be able to take him down. They can only finish Gordon late in the third, so 75 points max for Patty. That is quite their prediction there, Jake.
Yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with that one. I think that Gordon has a suspect chin. I think that Patty can capitalize on that. Patty's the bigger guy, so I mean, we'll see how the wrestling exchanges go. I don't even know. I'm not sure either guy will even be looking to take it down. Both of them might be. I mean, both of them are sort of grapplers, but Gordon didn't shoot for a takedown in his last fight against Leonardo Santos, and Santos was completely gassed. If Gordon wanted to take him down in the third round and just finish him with ground and pound, he totally could have, and he didn't opt to shoot for a single takedown. And Patty's coming off a couple subs. I kind of think he wants to land a knockout. I think he's going to be looking to catch Gordon's chin early, and I think it's a good matchup for Patty to get a knockout. I mean, Gordon's been knocked out 4 times in his career. I mean, the guy has a suspect chin. I mean, I don't think there's any debate there.
Fair enough. All right, let's move it on. Tony has a good question. Let's talk about this. We have 7 minutes left here. This is a fight that's probably the most exciting of the night that everyone's tuning in to see, and it'll probably be very important for DFS to get it right, and that's the Toporia versus Mitchell fight. Tony's asking, Jake, he says, what's your thoughts on Mitchell being able to get it to the ground and dominate as usual, or does Toporia just knock him out? I'm really curious on your thoughts here. The model obviously prefers Toporia here by a decent margin, but how do you think it plays out?
Man, this is a fascinating fight. I think this is the most exciting fight on the card. So, I mean, you guys said it right there. I mean, that's the question. Can Mitchell get Toporia down? Toporia has not been taken down yet in the UFC. Hasn't faced a ton of attempts. Most of those are from Zalal, who doesn't have a great takedown accuracy. So we don't have a great gauge on Toporia. But even prior to joining the UFC, he's a tough guy to get down. I mean, his background is in grappling. He's a BJJ black belt. All of his early wins came from submissions. I want to say the first 7 finishes of his career, whereas lately he's been knocking everyone out. The guy's super well-rounded. Obviously, Mitchell's a one-dimensional wrestler, but I think as the fight goes on, Mitchell will find more success because Toporia's one weakness is his cardio. But I think early on, Toporia is going to come in with a smart game plan, be leaning forward, have a low stance, be looking for a knockout, and be looking to make sure he doesn't get taken down. So I think early on, it's going to be tougher for Mitchell to land any takedowns. But yeah, sure. In the third round, yes, I think Mitchell can land takedowns at that point if the fight gets there. And maybe he can land one in the first 2 rounds. But I think he's going to have to survive some big shots. And we really haven't seen Mitchell, take that much damage because he's been so dominant on the mat with wrestling. So I think it's a really tough matchup for Mitchell. And I know a lot of people are on Mitchell by decision here, which I definitely think is possible. But I'm not sure if he's going to put up a big score if that happens, because all of his big scores have come from when he's just dominated fights on the mat from start to finish. I don't see that happening here. I could see him dominating the third round, maybe the second half of round 2, but I think early on, Toporia is going to be able to keep this fight on the feet. Good chance he knocks Mitchell out. But even if he doesn't, I think that's going to lower Mitchell's ceiling here, making it tougher for him to, break 100 points in a decision win.
Fair enough. So let me ask you this. I think I know the answer, but if you had to go 100% Toporia or 100% Mitchell in your lineups, which would you choose?
I think it's Toporia for the ceiling. I mean, maybe we get a slate where only two dogs win. And at that point, if Mitchell scores 80, 85, 90 points, he's still going to be useful. I just don't see a huge ceiling here for Mitchell. So, I mean, it's harder to get real excited about him. And I think he's going to be a really popular dog. I mean, both guys are going to be popular. There's some merit to just fading the fight and hoping that it ends in a closer decision where the winner scores, 80, 85 points, which is certainly possible. But, I mean, if you're looking at a pure ceiling play, I think it's Toporia.
Fair enough. All right, let's move on. We have 4 minutes left in the show. We have to get through a fight that you have to target in DFS. The winner's likely to score well. We have to get through a prize picks play, and we have to get through our stream parlay. So let's rapid speed this here, Jake. Which fight, unfortunately, we lost the best one on the card in Salvador and Da Silva. But of the remaining fights, which is most likely to end with a high score in DFS from the winner?
I think it's Silva Brown. I think Silva has a really good chance to end that early. And I think if he doesn't, he could slow down. And at that point, I think TJ Brown has historically done a good job of finding late finishes. He'll mix in wrestling and striking. So I think we either see Silva get an early finish or a chance for Brown to take over in the second half of that fight. So I'm still on Silva, but I think you do want to have some TJ Brown hedge there.
Fair enough. All right, you guys see the promo on screen here. Occupy Fantasy has partnered with Prize Picks, prizepicks.com. Use promo code OCCUPY when you sign up. Get a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100 where you can parlay props, all different sports. They have some really soft UFC lines. Jake, which one stood out to you this week that you're hammering?
Yeah, I mean, in line with what we were just talking about, I like Brown under 10 minutes. I really like Silva's chances of finding a finish here. And, if he gets it, I think it's going to be in the opening round and a half. So I really like that under there.
All right, and let's close out with our stream parlay. Remember, all the best bets for this card can be found on Jake's site, MMADFS.com. You want to get access to those early in the week before the lines move. He also posts them at OccupyFantasy.com in our daily plug on Fridays. Any bets that are remaining, tons of great value. He's been crushing it this year. So I'm going to pick a bet. Jake's going to pick a bet. We'll parlay it together for our hopefully profitable stream parlay. Jake, I was close to taking Gordon, money line, or Gordon by decision. But this is a Patty-heavy show so far, so I'm going to stray away from that. And I'll just go Silva inside the distance. We've been talking about him for 30 minutes so far. So Silva inside the distance, I think it's plus 185 or so. So Eric Silva's my side of the parlay.
165.
All right, sorry, 165. We'll take it.
This has been a Silva-themed show down the stretch, but I like it. And, going back to Chris Curtis, I think Curtis by KO at plus 300, I think that's too wide. So I'm going to go with that for my leg. And if we combine the two of those, it's going to be plus 960 for the parlay.
Good enough. And I think we got a 20-1 or 24-1 parlay in the plug, so make sure you check that out as well. I like it, Jake. I like it. So this is going to be an exciting card. Super pumped for it. Again, next week is the final UFC fight of the year, final UFC card of the year before we have a nice break over Christmas and New Year's. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. Get notified when we go live. Upload these videos. You don't want to miss them. Give us a thumbs up if you appreciate the YouTube UFC content. If you have any questions, it's too late to comment on the video. Join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. We'll be in there through lock and all the way until the end of the fight, sweating it out, answering questions, talking about late swap, complaining about late swap mostly. So join our Discord server. Come check us out. You can find all of Jake's work at MMADFS.com, the sheet where he writes up every single fight from a betting and DFS perspective, the archive where you can go back and look at historical information for DFS slates, invaluable resource to help you figure out how to approach every single slate. And then OccupyFantasy.com is where Jake writes the daily plug, top plays, lineup construction tips, the best bets, lineup contest selection tips, everything you need to crush a card. Our Occupy model ranks every fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings using our proprietary metrics, has projected ownership. Our lineup builder allows you to build up to 300 lineups. Jesus Christ, we got everything for you. Come check us out at OccupyFantasy.com. And the final question from Wig in the chat. You guys think you need a piece of the main event in your lineups to win? Jake, you don't think so. I don't think so. One lineup. Are you playing the main event?
No.
There's your answer, Blake. So, all right, for Jake, follow him on Twitter at DFS_MMA. You can follow me at Brian Jester FF. Follow us at Occupy Fantasy. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Good luck and enjoy UFC 282.